already.
Hi parents, it's Tammy Muller. I was the Bible speaker this week for Youth 1 Week, and what a blast we had. What we like to do though is at the end of the week, in order to just foster some conversations for you and the kids, is we like to go through a little bit about what we talked about. So day 1, which was Monday, we really talked about who our King is. God is King. And so we talked about what a king does. And so a king has power. We talked about God's sovereignty. We talked about a king allows passage into his kingdom. And so through Jesus in John 14:6, Jesus is the way, the truth, the life. He is the passage into the kingdom. And then once you're in the kingdom, the king protects you and provides for you. And so we talked about that as well. On day 2, we talked about who would oppose the king. And it's obvious from Romans 3:23 that we've all fallen short. We've all stood in opposition of the king. And so we ended that night with a fun skit that you could remind your kids of. But the skit included bringing different people up, and we had the King of Love-A-Lot. So we had one of our staff members dressed as the King of Love-A-Lot, and he loves a lot. But there's one thing the king doesn't like. He doesn't like spots. There ain't no spots getting into his kingdom. It doesn't matter if you get big spots like this or if you got little spots like this. And so we had 4 different shirts worn by 4 different staff members. Spots like this, spots like this, maybe one with just 1 or 2 little spots. And the reality is the king said, no, no, no. It doesn't matter how big those spots, how little, how many, how few, no spots. We even had one counselor come up. His shirt was clean. The kids were going crazy, like, yeah, you did it, you did it. And he went, yeah, and under his armpits were 2 hidden spots. There are no spots hidden from the king, and those spots represented our sin. And so sin has no place in heaven, not because of the amount or the extremity of it, but simply because of it's God's kingdom, and he is not going to compromise by allowing sin in his kingdom. But he made a way, so he had a fully white shirt on, and he offered his clean white shirt to anybody who had the spotted shirt. If they wanted his, he would take theirs. When they give him their shirt, that is his mercy. When he gives them his white shirt, that is grace. And so that was day 2. On day 3, we talked about the king's victory, the victory over the power of sin. So John MacArthur had talked about the fact that you have the penalty of sin that's been dealt with through Jesus. The power of that sin, although we still struggle with sin in our sin nature, its power over us to enslave us has been broken. And so as much as we were slaves or servants of that sin, we are now called to be slaves or servants of righteousness. And so we talked about what the enemy's go-to method is. We looked at Luke 4 and where the enemy tempts Jesus. If he's going to use it on Jesus, he's going to use it on us. And so what he typically does, and we had a pastor in our church, Pastor Brandon Hillstead, who used this example, but he would say, he would plant a doubt, and he would say, oh, you know, gosh, you should really, God won't let you listen to that music, or God doesn't like that stuff you're watching, or God doesn't want you hanging out with those people. No. And then he would plant something shiny. So this doubt about God's goodness or his character, this doubt about who God is. And then he would plant this little shiny thing over here. No, look over here. Just do it to get in with the in crowd. I can't believe God would withhold that from you. You know, you should have that thing. God won't let you have that desire of yours. You should not have to go without it. And so there's this doubt that he plants, and then this little diversion, this thing that's better over here. Look at this, look how good this is. Not realizing as soon as you give in to that, you're going to have regrets immediately, because that's the way the enemy works. He lies, and he spews out lies of something better than God, something better than Christ, when really all of what we're looking for can be met in him. Day 4 was the King's Festival. That was super fun. You'll have to ask your kids about it. We spent the evening in the ball field just doing all sorts of King's Festival games. Day 5, then we talked about the King's commissioning. What does the King want us to do? Well, he wants us to live a life devoted to him. Don't drift, stay close. Drifting happens when we don't do anything. So what are we going to do in our lives in order to keep ourselves close to the Lord? Remembering that the plan is ultimately his. He is the planner. And we so often want to say, oh, where's the plan? Where's the plan? When really we just need to trust the one who made the plan. And then we also talk about the fact that there's a lot of bad things or seemingly bad things that happen, but Romans 8:28 tells us that God works everything out for good to those who've been called according to his purpose, who he's predestined to become conformed into the image of his son, says Romans 8:29. And so what we think is good is usually that which is comfortable or convenient or clear. And God says, oh, no, 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 no. What's good is anything that makes you into the image of my son. And sometimes that's not comfortable. So lots of times it's not convenient, and many times it's not clear. But if we look for the good in the situations that don't necessarily feel good, we can see that there are things that God uses to make us more into the image of his son. And on day 6, the last day, we're going to go through, that's actually tomorrow, we're going to go through Psalm 95. What's our response to all this going to be? And Psalm 95 is a psalm of worship. And it talks about the importance of gathering together. It talks about the importance of having thanksgiving, the importance of remembering who he is and what he's done, and the importance of telling others about this king. Everybody's looking for hope. Everybody's looking for purpose. And what we have is, even though there's trials and struggles and sufferings, if we didn't have Jesus, there would be no hope in it. But because we do, there is. So thanks for sending your kids to camp. I hope this helped. I hope this helped to just maybe review a few things for them, or to them, for you, to them, you know what I mean, so you can have some great conversations. Thanks again, parents.